Hi everyone, I hope you guys are all having a great day. Today I wanted to share some nonfiction books that I've been reading. At the beginning of the year, I decided to make a goal to read more nonfiction this year, and I wanted to read one a month, so 12 by the end of the year. I have been doing pretty well with that goal, and I wanted to share some books that I've read so far. These books are in order of those I liked the least to those I liked the best. The first book that I want to share with you is Devil in the White City by Erik Larson. It is about the Chicago World's Fair in 1892 and 1893. I'm going to start with some positives and then I'm going to get into the negatives about the book. On the positive side, it has a great title. Devil in the White City. Erik Larson has some excellent titles. It's one of the reasons I like his books so much. But that's really all there is to this one. It's got a good title. It parallels the Chicago World's Fair and the murders that were happening at the time. A very violent serial killer was on the loose. On the positive side, it had a lot of very interesting things in it that I didn't know about the Chicago World's Fair. I actually didn't honestly know what a World's Fair was until I read the book, so that was interesting. I didn't know that the first Ferris wheel was invented specifically for the Chicago World's Fair, so if you're interested in that, you can read the book. But that's it. It has a great title. I learned some cool things about the Ferris wheel. That's really all the positive things I have to say about it. On the negative side, I didn't like the parallel storylines. The part about the Chicago World's Fair really focused a lot on how they just struggled to build the fair, and I found that pretty boring. The author tried to make it exciting, and he failed. On the other hand, I didn't think that there was enough detail about the murderer and the murderers. I was really hoping to get more information and more detail on that, and the author wasn't able to provide it, which makes sense because the murders were over 100 years ago, but it was disappointing overall. I think I only gave this book like 2 stars on Goodreads. The next book that I want to share is Blink by Malcolm Gladwell. It is a pop psychology book on split-second decisions that we make and first impressions. I really enjoyed this book. Some positives for the book are that it was very interesting and thought-provoking for me, especially on matters of race, racism, and police violence. He had a lot to say on that, and it was just very, very challenging and thought-provoking. Also, as a teacher, I thought he had some interesting things to say on how questioning affects students, especially when they're test taking. And so I've actually been able to implement some of the suggestions that he makes in my classroom, and I've seen some very interesting results. So it was interesting and had some very practical applications that I've enjoyed using in my classroom. On the negative side, some parts of it were boring and dull, and sometimes I didn't quite think that the examples that he used fit with the point he was trying to make. But overall, I enjoyed this book. I think I gave it 3 stars. Oh, okay, and I really struggled with these next 2 because I loved them both. I'm going to share Bonhoeffer first. This book is about Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was a pastor, a theologian, and he was also involved in a plot to assassinate Hitler during World War II. The positives on this book are that it just gave a wonderful, detailed picture of this man's life. I felt like I really got to know him through the book, which I think is because there's just so much detail that the author had access to because of the amount that Bonhoeffer wrote. It was also a very interesting look at what the Nazi regime did in Germany, how they targeted the Christian church and influenced and persecuted the church, what their goals were and how they went about achieving those goals within the church was very interesting. On another note, the author had a really enjoyable sense of humor, which I enjoyed because it's a pretty dense book, and I'm not sure that I could have gotten through it had Erik Metaxas not been an enjoyable person to read. Finally, it was very challenging for me as a Christian to see the passion and drive and dedication of this man. He was not very old. He was young when he died, and just the amount of work that he did in his life is so impressive and so challenging. His love for the Lord is intense, and it was a very challenging read for me to just compare my life to his a little bit. So I thoroughly enjoyed it. I gave this book a 5-star. Definitely one of the best nonfiction books that I've ever read. I think that if you're a Christian, you should read this book. And even if you're not a Christian, but you're interested a little bit in some of the assassination attempts on Hitler, this might be an interesting read for you. And finally, one of the most meaningful books that I think I've ever read in my life is Hillbilly Elegy. I have seen this book on the shelves and in Facebook and advertised quite a bit, and I didn't really think anything of it. I thought it was just, I don't know what I thought. I wasn't at all interested. But my brother, who until probably this year has maybe finished one book in his entire life, called me in the middle of the night to tell me that he had read a book and that I needed to read it immediately. So I bought it, I read it, and it is fantastic. This book is basically a memoir of a man who was raised in Ohio. His family is from the hills of Kentucky, and it's his memoirs of what it was like to grow up in a hillbilly family and hillbilly culture, and how he sort of escaped from that culture. He was raised in an incredibly poor family in an incredibly poor region of Appalachia, and how he moved on from that, ended up graduating from Yale Law School. This hits home for me because I am a hillbilly on both sides of my family. Two different kinds of hillbillies, two very different kinds of hillbillies. However, still hillbillies on both sides, and it was amazing for me to see that there is another person out there who feels the same way I do about my family and who sees the same things that I do about my family. Because I'm going to be honest, I sort of thought that I was crazy, but I'm not. Other people see what I see and think what I think, and that's okay. It's one of the beautiful things about a book when you realize that there's somebody out there who thinks the same way that you do. It also meant a lot to me because it showed me a lot of the positive and negative aspects of hillbilly culture. It made me incredibly happy that my parents decided to raise me somewhere other than the hills of West Virginia and North Carolina. But it also made me realize what I missed out on because I wasn't raised in those locations, particularly my relationships with my grandparents. All of my grandparents have passed away, and I never had those relationships with them because I lived so far away from them. And the older I get, the more I regret that, and reading this book just helped cause me to think more about that. Finally, my final positive for this book is that it caused me to think about some of the things that are wrong with our culture and possible ways to fix them. The author doesn't really suggest ways, but he certainly challenges you to consider what might be useful. Particularly, something that the author talks about is just the lack of motivation and lack of work ethic that is prevalent in so many people in our generation and the generations after and the generations a little bit younger than me, particularly in hillbilly culture that he's writing about. As much as I loved this book, objectively I can see that there are things that other people are not going to like about it. People who are in the hillbilly culture are probably going to find it a little bit insulting if they don't read carefully. I can see how reading it you might feel that he's only highlighting the negative aspects of the culture, and that might hurt people. On the other hand, people who are outside of the hillbilly culture might not get it. I do not think this book is going to be meaningful unless you are from the hills of Appalachia or you have family who are from there and you want a better look at part of their life. Despite those negatives, this really was one of the most meaningful books to me that I've ever read. It just felt like home. And that's not to say that the things that happened to this man are the same thing that's happened to me. Absolutely not the case. But just some of it gave me a rich understanding of my family and family background, and really helped me identify some of those thoughts and feelings that I've had in the past. I would recommend it to anybody who wants to know about hillbillies, or is actually a hillbilly themselves and would like to read a little bit of an anthropological study of that culture. So that's it. That's the nonfiction books that I have read this year. I am currently reading Gun, Germs, and Steel, which is interesting. I don't know, I'm only like 50 pages in. I'll let you know what I think about that when I'm done. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you guys have a great day. Bye.